It's kind of tricky. All right, the wisdom of postmodernism. And could you turn on that rear projector? I forgot to turn that on. Thanks. The wisdom of postmodernism, which seems like an oxymoron because it is. And that's kind of the point that Solomon is making about this particular form of wisdom that he's going to introduce us to. I mean, we've already talked about it in the past, but he's really going to get into detail about this particular type of wisdom. In these verses from verse 12 to 18, that's what we're going to be looking at, there are two proverbs that Solomon kind of sneaks in. And these proverbs step away from the first-person I that he uses over and over again. He speaks of himself as kind of an autobiographical, in an autobiographical sense. He's going to move away from that, and he's going to set down some anchors for us. And these anchors, you'll notice, pop in and out of Ecclesiastes all throughout the book. And these are really the nuggets of truth that are helpful in guiding us through his very, very complex, very offensive at times, things that he says, and some theologically incoherent things that he says that seem to ride against what the Bible states. The point of him doing this is to show us that by trying to do things a certain way, we're not going to be able to figure out the mysteries that to the questions, the answers and the mysteries, the answers to the mysteries and the questions, there we go, that we've been all trying to find our entire lives. And I think that's really the entire point of Ecclesiastes is what is that main anchor? What is that thing that holds us in place and helps us weather the storm of ideas? So here's the big idea this evening. The despair we see in the world today is a result of mankind looking for truth and meaning through observation and reason alone. The despair we see in the world today is a result of mankind looking for truth and meaning through observation and reason alone. You probably have heard the term postmodernism before. It's a pretty well-known term these days. Postmodernism essentially states there's no form of absolute truth. And how people got there is a really fascinating piece of history and philosophy that we're not going to have enough time tonight or any night to really get into. But it really comes down to one person, and his name was Descartes. He was a French philosopher, and he was trying to figure out how on earth we can possibly know if anything is true. He actually, and this is odd, but he actually spent an entire day in an oven. I don't think it's like an electric oven. This was many years ago, so it would have been like one of these larger stone-type ovens. But he kind of locked himself away for an entire day and wrestled with this question, how can I possibly know that anything is true? Because all truth is something that we believe without having proof for it. And what he means by this, not what I mean, but what he means by this, is that you can't actually trust anything that you know because it's all based on memory. If your memory is wrong, then you can't actually know if you are correct about anything. And that's a pretty disconcerting thought. We just assume that everything works in the world. But why do we assume that? And so he had this and it wasn't an answer to the question, it was actually out of frustration. He said, I think, therefore, I am. So what was he rooting his entire belief system in? Human reason. If I can reason it out, if I can logically explain it, then it must be true. Because if I can't even trust my own thoughts, then nothing is trustworthy. And so he said out of frustration, well, that's as far as I can go. I can only go as far as my thoughts. So if I'm thinking, then this must be true. I'm not a butterfly having a dream about me being me, which is actually something that he considered. It's very bizarre. So postmodernism, this idea that you can't know absolute truth apart from reason. And that's really what it is that human thought, human reason is how we figure things out. You can see where we are today. That the root of truth for every person is in their experience. That is what people believe today. If I have experienced something, it must be true. One person put it this way: I heard the sounds of voices singing outside of my window, and when I pursued those voices, I ended up in the middle of a forest, and that is when I knew that I wasn't actually a man. This is becoming more and more common. And it's not because of the psychological idea of gender dysphoria, gender dysphoria. It's not that. It's not increasing. What it is this postmodern idea that my experience determines truth. And that's only one area of many areas that are affected by that very fallacious, very wrong way of thinking. It affects our morality. It affects our ethics. It affects how you view the Bible. It affects so many things in life, you can't get away with it. If you adopt that, if you think that, it's going to mess you up. And this is one of the root causes of despair in the world today. That absolute truth is simply the basis or based upon my experience as an individual. So let's get into the text here, chapter 1, starting in verse 12. He says this, and he's introducing himself. This is biographical. He moves away from the third person, or I would say that this is really God's narration about him. He moves away from that and he goes into this first person. I, the preacher, was king over Israel in Jerusalem, or I, Kohelet, was king over Israel in Jerusalem. So what is he doing? He's actually identifying himself. He's saying, hey, this is who I am. I am Solomon. I am the king of Israel. This is very important for us because it helps us understand that Solomon, knowing who he is a believer. These are not the words of a skeptic or an unbeliever or somebody who doesn't believe in Yahweh. This is a person who believes in God, who wrote the majority of the Proverbs in the book of Proverbs, who was the wisest man on earth. So what he's about to say is very important because he has put the work in and he has been moved by the Spirit to write these things. So what is he going to reveal for us? He reveals his method of discovery, that is, the wisdom of experience and observation. Now, he's actually going to do this negatively because he's bringing us to this place. It's kind of like what, was it Moody that said, before you can get somebody saved, you have to get them lost, right? And I think he's kind of doing this intellectually. He wants to get us lost so that we can see the importance of what it means to be rooted and grounded in religion and tradition. And by tradition, I don't mean just the traditions of man. I'm talking about the traditions of the Word of God, the traditional beliefs that we hold on to. It is very, very important that we do this. So what is he going to tell us about wisdom and experience? Well, he's using this method of wisdom or of observation and experience to make sense of the world that he lives in, to make sense of what he sees. Was it Tennyson that said, nature red in tooth and claw? When you look out into nature, what do you see? Brutal, death, destruction, decay, fear. When you use just your manner of observation, you would think that whoever created this world must have been some cruel being. And in fact, there are many pagan religions who come to that conclusion because they're basing their belief of truth on their observations and their reasoning. If you do this alone, you will not come to correct conclusions about God and about the reality of truth. And I've said this before, that there is a difference between facts, what we call brute facts, that is just information, versus what truth is. Truth is taking those facts, putting them in the order under God and reasoning and logic, and saying, this is what the information tells us. Kent Hovind, you probably have heard of Kent Hovind before. I used to love listening to him. New Earth creationist. He used to travel all around, thrown in jail because he wasn't paying taxes. And I think that was probably all a farce. They just didn't like him because of the things he was saying. But he gave this really interesting illustration. He said, you have a frog, okay? And you have these three scientists who are trying to figure out the amount of jumping length a frog has. And so they simply do some observation experimentation, some Sir Francis Bacon stuff, right? They leave the frog there and they yell at the frog. They say, "Jump, frog, jump!" And it jumps. And it jumps like 8 feet. And they're like, "Oh, wow, that's pretty amazing." So they write down, jumped 8 feet. Well, then they cut off one of its legs. And they get down and say, "Jump, frog, jump!" And it jumps, but it only goes about 3 feet. Like, oh, that's very interesting. So they write that down. And then they cut off the 2 back legs. And then they get down really close to the frog. They're like, "Jump, frog, jump!" And it does nothing. Their conclusion, when you cut off a frog's legs, it goes deaf. That is a wagging the dog type of fallacy, saying that the conclusion doesn't actually, it's a non sequitur, it doesn't actually follow from the observations. That's the difference between truth and facts. You have to know what the facts actually say and where they go and how to put them together. And that's what he's really trying to do. He's trying to get down to truth. And so he's looking out into the world, and the first thing that he looks at is work and labor. Listen to what he says here in the next verse. "And I gave my heart," and when he says heart, he's talking about something, this is very close to him. Goodness gracious, who is texting me? Like 7 texts in a row. And they're still going. So when he says he set his heart on something, he's talking about something that's very close, very important to him. This is something he's putting his whole body, his mind, his soul into. And he says, "I gave my heart to seek and to search out by wisdom concerning all things that are done." This is not wisdom, godly wisdom. This is a wisdom that is human wisdom. Observation and reasoning. You'll see how that it connects here in just a second. "So by wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven, this sore travail hath God given to the sons of man to be exercised therewith." You might have a translation that says, "The work that God has given mankind is evil." Is work evil? No, absolutely not. Work is not evil. But here he's saying that the labor that God has given to man is evil. He's getting us lost because if you were to base all of your observations and reasoning simply by your experiences and you were to try to measure truth according to that, you would come to the same conclusion. In fact, if you really think about it, you'd be like, wow, this actually makes a lot of sense. This, by the way, is the very reason why Karl Marx, when he wrote the Humanist Manifesto, or the Communist Manifesto, the Communist Manifesto, the reason that he got such a huge following, because what he said about capitalism made a lot of sense. If you read it, you're just like, yeah, why do we do this way? What is the point of this? I don't own anything that I produce. I mean, it just seems to really appeal to your observations and your reasoning. But there's a reason why he's wrong and why Solomon is intentionally leading us to the wrong place. Let's look at the next verse. By the way, that point there was attempting to find meaning in labor is like trying to shepherd wind. Okay? It's trying to shepherd wind. So the wisdom, experience, and observation, attempting to find meaning of labor in labor is like trying to shepherd wind. Okay, and this is what he says. And I gave my heart to seek. This is a sore travail for the sons of man. Verse 14, I have seen all the works that are done under the sun. That means every type of work out there. It doesn't matter what it is. I don't care if you're an EMT, if you're a nurse, if you're a doctor. I don't care if you are in politics. I don't care if you are a sewer, I don't even know what they call those. I don't care if you wash windows, right? I don't care what it is that you do. I have looked at everything. And if you are to draw the conclusion based on your observations alone, you would have to admit that life has absolutely meaning in its work. Work does not do a blessed thing for you because in the end, your work disappears. If the generation dies, you are forgotten and you are lost in a void of meaninglessness. So he's seen all of it. Behold, all is vanity, or an enigma, something difficult to make sense of, and it's a vexation of spirit. That idea, the vexation of spirit, literally means to shepherd wind. We like to say herding cats, right? It's like herding cats. Like, how do you herd cats? Well, you don't. We have a couple of cats. We're not animal people, but somehow we ended up with a dog and 2 cats. And I can really understand that idea. Shepherding the wind is like herding cats, honestly. You just can't do it. Then we have this voice change, okay? So he makes this really bold statement, but he makes this voice change, and he offers a proverb that's going to anchor us. This is what he says. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. The crookedness, that's like a literal thing, but it's really a metaphor for moral wrongness, for corruption. All right? So this is what he's saying. He says, no one can make corruption beautiful. If you look at the Septuagint translation of this from the Hebrew, it actually says ornamentation. It's like hanging things on corruption. It reminds me of that proverb. A beautiful woman who basically has like a corrupt soul is like a pig with a ring in their snout, right? It doesn't change what it is. And that's essentially what he's saying. The corruption, you can't make it look nice. You can't beautify it. You can't explain it away. That's how corruption is. That's how a very crooked thing is. You can't really straighten it out. The next thing he says that no one can count what does not exist. He says, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. If it doesn't exist, you can't count it. What is he getting at here? The meaning in work is an enigma in the same way that these two things cannot be made sense of. You can try to work it out in your mind. You could try to reason it. But if you are doing it based on your observation, your experience, your reason alone, if that is your truth, it is ultimately, utterly meaningless. You cannot make sense of it. You cannot find meaning and truth simply through your observation, your experience. Next, he says this, and this is him talking to himself. I love how it says it in the King James Version. I communed with mine own heart. What were you doing over there? Are you talking under your breath? I was communing with my own heart. That's what I was doing. Oh, that sounds very serious. It is serious work indeed. We do self-talk a lot, don't we? Constantly talk to ourselves. Have you ever, and I think this is more on the kind of philosophy, theology side, I know that other people have experienced this, where you come to a theological conundrum and it keeps you up at night. Like, I have gotten into these things where I literally cannot sleep, and I can't think of anything else except trying to make sense of this theological conundrum. It is so important for me to get down to the bottom of it, but I will not allow myself to rest. I've spoken with people like this before, but I mean, this is no different than any aspect of our life. When there's something that's bothering us, that's urgent, we think about it, don't we? Deeply, long, thinking about these things. And sometimes we have to speak truth to ourselves. Sometimes we have to correct ourselves. So this is what he's doing. He's saying, this didn't work. So I was telling myself there has to be a solution. There has to be a way to make this work, to use observation and experience. There has to be a way to find truth through observation and experience. maybe it's not the observation part that's wrong. Maybe it's what I'm observing. Maybe I need to dabble in something different, apply it to something else. So what he's saying to himself is that he recognizes that even the depth of his education, as much wisdom and learning as he has, it's still limited by experiential wisdom. He hasn't experienced everything. He looked at the work, he couldn't make sense of it, but maybe if I just knew more, it would solve the problem. I'm just going to set myself on knowing more. Well, guess what? As he digs deeper, so this new approach, he digs deeper into knowledge. As he does this, what he's going to find is that it's worse. The more he learns, the worse it gets. The more that he understands, the more vexed he becomes. He's going to dabble into some stuff, and there's a lot of debate here about what he's dabbling in. But he offers this proverb. Actually, I don't think that's supposed to be there. Oh, yeah, he offers this proverb. So he says there, I am come to great estate, and I have gotten more wisdom than all of them, because we know that he's Solomon, that have ever been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this also is vexation of spirit. So here are the two things that he's going to be talking about here. These two things, these two pieces of observations, this new information that he's getting in. And that's kind of explained on the back here. What I think he's getting at is that he tried to experience some type of physical and mental experiment. Some have taken this to mean that he got involved in some really questionable things. That he actually got involved with drug-fueled type parties to gain this type of experience. But actually what I think he is doing is he's saying that I went from the work part and I went into the education academic part. I started to look at the scientific side of things, the knowledge side of things, the information side of things. Maybe through those I could figure it out. But what does he find out? That the more you know about the world, the greater the vexation. Okay, think of the word triggered. Think of how when something might just get you very, very, urgently upset about something. That's the idea of vexation. And also that the information you have, the more information you have, the greater the pain that you experience. So academics and learning didn't do it for him. It didn't make sense of everything. So here's Solomon's conclusion. He says this, and this is his proverb: for in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. Now this is really insightful to Solomon. Because whenever you read a proverb that is one of Solomon's in the book of Proverbs, what you are doing is you're coming to the conclusion of this very long, intricate process that he goes through, this methodology that he uses to get down to a conclusion, and that he pops out these proverbs that just really encapsulate this truth. And what is the truth? We have two main ones. The first one was that first proverb, that the crooked can't be made straight, that you can't make things beautiful if they're corrupt. And then he gets to the second one, and that is that the more that you learn, the more sorrowful you become. College students know all about this. But he's not talking about tests. Observational wisdom does not have the ability to make sense of work. That's his conclusion. It's still an enigma. You can't nail it down. You can't get to the heart of it. You can't get to truth about what work means by observation, by reasoning and experience alone. You can't. Well, here's the application for this evening. Postmodernism depends on human reasoning to make sense of the world and to give meaning to the world. The opposite outcome is actually prevalent. Increased Scientific knowledge, improved education, and personal experience have only led to further pain. After the Enlightenment, things were supposed to get really good. But then we had 2 world wars, and we had Marxism and communism, and we had Mao, and we had the genocides in Cambodia, the genocides that happened in and around Japan, in China, in Korea, even in Egypt with Coptic Christians. What we've found is that scientific knowledge, information, has not solved the issue of meaning. If you run into somebody who seems to be despairing because they don't know absolute truth or they don't accept it, that is what you feed them. You feed them the truth of God's Word. The truth of God's Word is the only thing that's ever going to give you absolute meaning in life. Not information, not scientific knowledge, not learning, not experience. It has to be rooted in God's Word, and that's the anchor that we hang on to, is it not? All right, I'm going to invite Pastor Dan up here to share some prayer requests, and he has some prayer cards to hand out, looks like, some prayer requests to hand out. Oh, we're going to pray for the people at McKinley?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So, yeah, they're kind of prayer cards, I guess. Just two things real quick. First, just a reminder, on Sunday night we have a brief business meeting, getting in some new members, and then a schedule surrounded, I can't talk tonight. On the 19th of June, we have a special event, and so just making sure we get that on the schedule figured out. I also have tonight some prayer requests from random people in our community. These are from the McKinley event. We asked people to fill them out for a drawing, and the whole point of that was simply to ask them if we could pray for them, and then secondly, would you like our church to tell you about free events? And 45 people said they'd like to know about that. So I contacted all those people today about our event coming up on the 19th. And so the hope is that that immediate touch point will keep fellowship in their brain. I didn't want to say hi at the McKinley event and then text them 4 months later and leave a long lapse there. So I think that'll give a good opportunity for them to not just enjoy our carnival situation, but maybe have their kids here at our church building too. So I will hand these out once we get divided up into groups, and a few of them are hard to read, but they all have something on them related to prayer. So just even if you have trouble reading the name, just pray for whatever it is on there. These are requests that people gave to our church. So we'll go ahead and break up and use all the quadrants of our church. We don't have to all stay right where you're at seated. You can use my office if you want to, and we'll go ahead and get to prayer. So go find 3 or 4 people to pray with.